Hi, guys. It's Don again. We are here tonight with another parent. This time we're going to be talking to a father of three. His name's Terry. We all know there's not too many fathers out there, at least not stepping forward. So it's really good to speak with another father and for have you guys hear from another father because we do things a little differently sometimes. Um, so I will I'll bring Terry on in just a moment. So hold on just a second and we'll be right back. My name is Don Stott. I am a father who experienced estrangement from one of my adult children firsthand. Welcome to Beyond the Pain, a place where parents of estranged adult children can find peace and healing. In each episode, I hope to share stories that'll help you through some of your darkest hours. To bring this out of the shadows and stop being ashamed. Then to build you up and inspire you to love yourselves even more. Hi, Terry. How are you doing
Hello.
today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Doing good. Well, I appreciate you being here. I know it's not necessarily always an easy thing to do to share such personal stuff and put that out there, but I do feel like, as we've talked about before, that it's important to get all different aspects, and if you can help one person that's going through this, it's worth it. So
Well,
uh,
it's a pleasure to be here, and just as you mentioned, the sharing part is it can be challenging, but I do find it important, as you say, is a good word.
yeah,
It's something that most parents don't talk about, or children don't talk about, and I've learned a lot. We've learned, my wife and I have learned a lot in the experience that we've been going through, and so I'm more than anxious to share our story, which hopefully will be similar or at least uh, people can maybe gain some semblance of commonality of what we've been going through as a family. And But anyway, pleasure to
for
be here.
sure. Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. So I guess before we get into your story, let's find out a little bit about who Terry is.
Yeah, sure, sure. Well, I'm in my mid 60s. Again, my name's Terry Parham. I gave my last name. I don't have a problem with that. I'm from Massachusetts, if you can't tell from my accent, and born and raised. Grew up in a nice lower middle class neighborhood. You and I were talking the other day about some of the TV shows of the 60s that I kind of modeled what I thought life was supposed to be
Right.
like in families. The Leave It to Beaver and My Three Sons and things like that. And
Oh yeah.
But I had a interesting, fun childhood, no regret type of childhood. Uh, Having said that, my parents divorced when I was young, around when I was about 10 years old. I do have a sister who I grew up with, who's a year younger than me. And so we grew up in a household basically managed by our mother, who's still with us, and she's in her mid 80s. We were just talking about elderly parents and everything. And um, in the community I grew up in, a lot of support from neighbors, a lot of I played sports a lot, so I had coaches and teachers and things like that that gave me a lot of insight and I'd like to call them mentors.
Sure.
Identify them as such. Um, and I at a young age had an idea of what I wanted to do in life. I got into law enforcement uh, from high school on. Basically, that was a desire of mine, and went to a
Right.
university that specialized in criminal justice, and then became a federal agent with the Department of Justice, and had I think a successful career. I'm still here to talk about it, and
Right?
no, we enjoyed, or I enjoyed a lot of that aspect of my life. But I brought my family along with me, and when I say that, it meant traveling the world. Basically, we lived in South America for over 10 years, and other
Wow.
states, and I live in Maryland now with my wife, and we're once again empty nesters, in due part to why we're here talking.
Right.
I have one of my three kids basically um, left us, and we're still trying to figure out, um, what that was all about and what we did or didn't do, um, and try to stay balanced in our own lives as we go through things. But I say that too, kind of going back to my childhood. I didn't realize until I understood what estrangement is, and um, how it's defined, that I too, as a child, went through an estrangement period
Yeah.
of close to 40 years with my
Mm.
father. Did not have a relationship with him for at least a good 40-year period. He's in his mid 80s or late 80s now, and he's trying to communicate and develop a relationship or rapport with me, which is a little too late, but still, I entertain that, and I mean, it in retrospect, I realize as a parent that, and I've heard you make this mention in your podcast. We weren't given a book on how to be parents, or a primer of any kind, and
Right.
and um, so we raise our children as we think is best, probably leaning mostly on how our parents raised us in some degree, in some sense. Um, and so I look at my father, probably, you know, trying to utilize whatever he, had in his life experiences growing up, and um, unfortunately, in his life, it involved alcoholism and things like that that which complicated his role as a father. And
Sure.
but I understand that now, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
I don't totally accept it, but that's what he went through, and he is who he is. He's still my father.
If you had one thing to pin it on, so to speak, what you thought would be the leading cause and I know it's complicated with your situation, but
Yeah, cause and estrangement. Yeah. Um, well, it is complicated, and I know all parents out there can say the same thing. Ours dealt with, let me have a starting point here, and that's always
okay.
a challenge to when people say, "Well, when did it all begin?" Boy,
Right.
I'd say probably a good 2 years ago. Um, he had relocated from. He was married, and his marriage fell apart, and so he came back to live with us about 2.5 years ago, and while he was living with us, he had a part-time job, and was staying busy in his own world, reclusive in the house. So when I say reclusive, he was behind closed doors most of the time. He was in the house, on the computer. He's also a musician, so he went to music school, and so he's doing music production type stuff, and whatever else. One thing that was unique for him compared to the other two children, was, or is, his um, involvement in religion. He's very, very religious, to the extreme in which we think that is a key component of issues that we had, which I'll get into. But so while he was living with us, kind of bringing us to, I have a starting point of the Thanksgiving of 2021, just the day before that Wednesday. He came home from work, and in the house was our oldest son and our grandchild, and he was very distraught about something, and he was anxious, and he said, "I need to speak with you." And so, but it wasn't just with me. He wanted to speak to the family. He then went into this, I don't even know what you call it, this description of an argument he was having with a manager at work. And this argument apparently was in the spiritual realm of spiritual warfare, which I had no idea what he was talking about. And I grew up in the church originally, although I'm not presently religious in that sense. And he cautioned that whatever this manager was doing was possibly opening up portals and things in the house, and it got
Uh,
really abstract from any of us understanding what he was really talking about. Um, that evolved into, after we had Thanksgiving, it evolved into him putting olive oil crosses on the doors and on the windows, and he was emotionally really involved with whatever that represented in his life. And my wife and I didn't know how to help him address it, listen. He was very kind of quiet and secretive about what all that entailed. Um, and it made us very, very uneasy in our own house.
right.
I mean, imagine getting up at 2 in the morning to get a bottle of water, and there's your son kind of peering around the corner because he's looking for, I don't know, demons or
Pepper.
something
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that went on for a good year and a half or so. And uh, I guess to tell the story best, my wife and I went on a vacation July of 2022, just for a week or so, a week and a half. And we came back. And then the night we came back, he opened the door, let us in. Uh, and he then said he was heading out to head to another state, to Louisiana, to meet with a pastor, dealing with whatever his religious associations were at that time.
Right.
And as we asked him, a little more specifics, where are you going? How long are you going to be gone? Why are you going? He was driving we live in Maryland, so Maryland to Louisiana, that's a long trip.
Yeah, it is.
And so he basically surprisingly said that he was old enough to be able to do what he wants, and he didn't need to tell us what he was doing or why. And so it became really odd because none of my children were raised to kind of be that way or to think that way. So it was very surprising for my wife and I to hear him express himself that way. So he leaves, and while he's gone, my wife and I are still trying to figure out what is going on, what's happening. We were communicating via text at the time, and he basically stayed with that mindset that he didn't need to share what he's doing, and we wouldn't understand and leave him alone. And so I decided, and I think I mentioned this to you when we spoke last,
Yeah.
I had enough. I, and then we talked about the generational views of how, baby boomer generation looks at fatherhood. And
Yeah.
I felt that what he was doing was more on the disrespect kind of level of things. At least that's how I took it. And I've did some introspection about that, but I really felt he was being challenged in some way that we wouldn't understand. And so I basically boxed up all of his belongings that he had in the house, let him know that I had done that, and told him when he came back he was to leave.
Right.
We needed him to leave the house, go where he needs to go, find himself, grow, whatever. And I'm saying all this not knowing whether that was the appropriate thing or the right thing to say or right thing to do, but is what I felt was right. My wife didn't really agree 100%, but she went along with it.
Yeah.
So he returns from his whirlwind trip to Louisiana and made a stop in a couple other states. He comes back. We knew, or I knew, he was going to be very upset having his belongings boxed up. We decided to have a sit down and talk. And during this discussion, he shared some things that I had never heard him say before. He basically told me that I was extremely controlling and that I was delusional. And he commented that not many people like me. And I sat there and I said, do I challenge him on any of that? Do I get into do I defend
Right.
myself? But I decided to just listen to him and try to hear what he was saying, trying to understand where this was coming from. I didn't really get that answer ultimately. The discussion ended up in, a high level argument, basically. Him walking away and me basically telling him he needs to just leave the house. And so it didn't happen immediately. Took him almost 2 months, really, after that argument for him to leave. He finally left, and it was interesting because he left in a cordial manner. We hugged, and I told him, "Hey,
Right.
give us a call." Now, when I say left, he had an idea where he was going. He was going to travel to the West Coast, which is another long trip. He's going to
Right.
drive his car with his belongings over to California, and that was something that he had in his kind of life journey or process. He had shared that with us before. For the music business, basically, as I mentioned, was
Right.
his passion, or is his passion. And so he hugged his mom and hugged me, and we said, "Let's stay in touch. If anything we do for you, we're here for you." He left. That was last year, or actually a year and a half ago, November of 2022. Yeah. Um, and to our surprise, he ultimately made it to California, uh, and then cut off all communication with his mother and I. And
Mhm.
um, there was some kind of intermittent communication prior to him just shutting things down. We had actually sent him some money. He need to have his car repaired, things like that.
Right.
Uh, so for my wife and I, it was a shock when he obviously decided to stop communicating with us. We didn't understand what that meant, what he was doing, why he was doing what he was doing. We felt that all three of our children were raised in a as loving of a family as we could provide, whatever that means. I mean,
Right.
our kids grew up overseas, as I mentioned, and so they were afforded things that maybe kids in general, that I definitely didn't have growing up. Um, I mean, when I say that, my friends, kind of laugh at me a little bit. They say our kids were spoiled because they had, nannies and maids and, people that
Right.
did the chores. And that was the overseas life. I was with the U.S. Embassy at the time, overseas. And so for him to react and do what he was doing, it was a shock to us. And to this day, it's been, like I said, over a year and 3 months.
Mm.
We, can't, we don't understand, what is going on, what has happened. Um, and in the interim, I guess the good side of it is my wife and I have been seeing a therapist, a family therapist, to
Okay.
walk us through a lot of the emotions. The first Christmas and New Year's of 2022 going into 2023, that hit us. But probably this past Christmas of 2023 going to present time hit us probably the hardest, of
You've had so
realizing.
much time to think and overthink and
Exactly.
digest. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's been. I mean, for me personally, with the therapy that we've been receiving, that I've been receiving, um, I feel I have my feet on the ground, and I'm able to continue with my life. I'm not overly thinking. I mean, I have my moments.
Good.
Um,
Sure.
my wife has her moments. She's broken down a couple of times, and particularly over the holidays,
Yeah.
um, and and we're there for each other, which is a good thing. Our other two children, who are older than our estranged son, um, uh, they are also in shock because he cut them off as well. Um, we have two grandchildren from our two oldest children, and has not shared any interest or expressed any interest
Mhm.
of their lives, which they can't figure. So I mean, it's been a challenge, but uh,
Yeah.
something that's familiar. I mentioned earlier my own kind of estrangement with my own father. I'm
Right.
drawing from that experience to understand what I went through, and it wasn't easy. I mean, it took me a long time to get through understanding who my father was, and
Yeah.
I can only assume that maybe our son is similarly doing the same. Not sure, but
Right.
anyway.
Well, I think it's a great thing that you and your wife, either together or separately, are doing the therapy because that's, I mean, not everybody needs it, but it's certainly a good tool especially if you find a good therapist. So, um,
Yeah. And one thing I've found, which is different from my wife, I've researched and listened to podcasts. I listened to your podcast. There's another podcast that got me started called The Estranged Heart,
yeah,
that made me understand, first of all, that this isn't that uncommon, which I didn't
right,
know. I didn't realize that maybe it's a generational thing or whatever, but I didn't realize that many families have been going through this. And maybe when I was growing up, I didn't have a name for it, just didn't know what it
right,
was. Now the
yeah,
word
me either.
estranged is kind of out there and understood a little bit more, thanks to yourself and others who are providing this kind of a platform. And for me personally, too, I think I shared this with you before, that uh, as a father, I've been searching for what other fathers have been going through.
Right,
Um, Many of the other podcasts and things that I've just happened to find, you hear more of the voices of the moms out there, that
absolutely,
and and a lot of times it's mostly moms, at least from my research, moms and daughters. Well, fathers and sons, that there's a dynamic there, which I'd have to say I have one daughter, and so there is a difference of how I relate to my daughter versus
oh
how I
yeah,
relate to my two sons, my oldest son and now my youngest son. Um, and so being able to hear your voice and hear you as a father that has gone through your experiences, that's what prompted me to reach out to you to begin with.
cool,
Just looking for um, the other dads that are out there that may have feelings on this, or may have experiences on this that I can learn from.
right, yeah, for sure, and I mean that's why whole reason I started it too because I didn't see much of any from a parent's point of view at all. I saw there were a few like therapists, but nothing from that a parent was doing. I think there's a few more now, but yeah, so that's well, I'm glad. I'm glad. Now you mentioned that your wife was a little on the fence, I guess, when this first happened. Are you guys
Well,
in a better place now with that?
I kind of felt that she didn't agree with what the
Right.
actions that I had taken, um, and my sense of where she was going emotionally was that maybe she was potentially blaming me for him leaving. And so I
Right.
kind of bared that, kind of burden for a while internally, trying to understand, is that what she was saying? Um, and I don't know. I to this day, I feel that what I did and had to do was the best thing for us at the time.
Yeah.
Um, could something else have been done differently? I mean, it's possible. Um, I've talked to other friends and others that know our son and know our family, and from the male perspective, particularly,
Right.
maybe maybe it's a generational thing, but my friends and family that are familiar with what this all represents feel that I took the right steps,
Yeah.
uh, others have expressed other emotions or other actions they might have taken to deal with that. I don't know. How we look at parents, how we look at elders, how we look at other people in general. That's it's kind of a personal thing, but also the culture has something to do with it too. I mean, my generation, as I said, I'm the product of the '60s and '70s, and from
Right.
childhood, and so respecting my elders and respecting my parents as best I could. Even though I had a falling out with my father, um, but you know. Um, I don't know. What our son ended up doing is so counter to what we thought we had provided, and just the the
Right.
foundation we had provided for him, for all of our kids. So it's been mind-boggling, and like I said, on occasion challenging for us to best understand. But yeah, therapy has been, for me personally, a kind of a godsend, and um, very helpful.
Yeah.
I've mentioned to my therapist that I'd even be appearing on your show,
Cool.
and other friends as well. And that's just it. I don't know if in your experience, well, you do this for your podcast, but in your personal circle of family and friends, do you talk about this? I find it helpful to talk about it,
Hmm.
to share what I'm thinking. But I hear from others saying, like even my wife and my oldest son, just yesterday he was here, and he was telling me he like my wife feels more comfortable keeping it inside and not
Yeah.
necessarily needing to express it to anyone. And
I mean, me personally, obviously, I do this, and in my very first episode, I shared my story, and I'm part of a couple of different Facebook groups, private Facebook groups that people can be on, and I find it very helpful talking about it to people. I mean, talking about it to people now, I don't have a problem with it. I don't go out and every person on the street,
right, right,
but but I certainly don't have a problem talking about it. And I think it's really helped because you never know. There may be another law enforcement person that is going through it that would never say anything because,
right.
men, the way we are, most of
Hmm.
us, they keep everything in. And even if they never say anything to anyone, just knowing that you as a fellow law enforcement person went through something like that, or it could be a cultural thing,
Right.
somebody that's in your culture or whatever.
Well, one of the things that we still are trying to wrap our minds around, and this is after talking with our therapist and trying to find some rational logic, I guess, to what could be at play.
Sure.
It's been offered to us that there could be some mental health issues at play with our son, which we don't know if that is the case. But the religion part of it, and when I say religion, my wife and I, and my wife comes from a very religious family. Um, uh, we kind of felt that what he was involved in leaned towards the cult type of
Right.
environment. But I say that, and I know people might might come at me for even commenting that way, but um, we really felt that something that he's being influenced by, particularly with the high level of religious. Uh, I mean, I'll never forget one dialogue we had while he was on his trip to Louisiana. Um, was I made a comment that family is, for me, most important to me, and
Right.
he took that simple phrase or thought and said that for him, God is more important than family.
Hmm.
And I again, I was raised in the church, but not raised to think that way.
Right.
Um, so our therapists and others have kind of asked the question of, could there be a mental health component to this that, you know, hopefully, if that is the case, he'll find whatever support he can find to
Right.
help him out with that. But from the father son aspect of it, this is something I've been thinking about. Is um, he, from as a father and someone that went through kind of a same thing of needing to get out and live my life and grow, take some risks, whatever. I just felt that him leaving the house, moving to California, um, you know, I don't know what's going to happen ultimately. I'm more of a glasses half full type mindset.
Yeah.
Um, I even told my wife the other day, I said, I won't be surprised if a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, who knows? Um, we reconnect with our son and everything is okay. And
Right.
he's gone through whatever he needs to go through, and he's able to at least communicate with us and let us know he's okay. I mean, and that's actually the aspect of it that bothers us the most, of not knowing if he's okay.
Always.
I guess we'll perpetually, kind of struggle with the questions of why and whatever,
Yeah.
and um, what could we have done differently? And I don't know what the answer is. We gave him, like I said, as all three children, a base of starting point of opportunities and seeing other countries and things like that. At least for me, that was something important. And
Right.
my wife is also from the Caribbean, so
Mhm.
so she's from another country as well, and so we've experienced things that are kind of unique to us in a way, uh, and everyone except for him seems to have kind of enjoyed the ride, I guess,
Right.
but having said that, I've told my wife this the other night, we'll we'll never really know what's going on in his mind and why he's doing what he's doing. And there's a good chance that a lot of what he's doing has nothing to do with us. Uh,
Mhm.
I don't know how, if in your experience, if that is even accurate saying anything like that, but
Well, it's funny you say that. It's absolutely accurate with my situation because just over this past summer, we were having lunch with my son and his wife and daughter, and we were just talking about stuff, nothing really important. But at that point, he let me know that his issue was really more about him than it was about us.
mhm.
So, I mean, and I have heard the opposite from other parents, but it does happen. So, and you're right, you're probably, I mean, unless he tells you or starts communicating especially, you're never gonna really know. The only thing I think, in my non-professional opinion, you just have to keep doing what you're doing and working on Terry, and your wife working on her, you guys working on each other, your relationship, and hopefully whatever, if you do make changes or if you feel the need to make changes, whatever those changes are, if they were
Hmm.
something that needed to change for him, then they're there when and if he decides to come back. But
Right, right. I
yeah.
wanted to ask you too, and I've heard, from the other podcasts and the research I've done, what does reconciliation really mean? What is that?
Well, I've heard a lot too. If- so it's a lot of walking on eggshells, especially in the beginning. Because you don't, even though with my situation, they he and his wife both, we talk some stuff out, and okay, this, we won't let this happen again. We'll make sure and communicate. We'll talk to each other if something's bothering us, that kind of thing. But you still, it takes a while to build back up that trust that's gonna occur. And I wholeheartedly believe it is now. Um, but it's difficult because, especially if you don't know what happened, if you don't know the
Right.
reason. And I've heard of other cases where they just want them back and they won't ever talk about it again, and that's okay with them. But are you still always worried that you're going to say the thing that whatever happened, or do the thing that happened and do it again? A lot of people are. So I think it just
Yeah,
takes.
I ask because I'm trying to envision what that even looks like.
Yeah.
Um, eh,
It
and
sounded in the beginning, when before you asked him to leave, you said that you wanted to listen to him.
Mhm.
And I think that, I mean, yes, that didn't quite work out the way you'd hoped, but I think that's important because they do, I say they, you always hear about people wanting to be heard and be seen and stuff. So when me and my son started communicating again, before we actually got together, we exchanged a few emails and some details about what his issue was, and then I responded to that and that kind of thing. So, and that's important, and but it's really hard to do because you want to defend yourself. you know
Well, I
that's a
mean,
nature.
I'm just trying to understand where that would even start, because one of the personal concerns or fears, I guess for me personally, it might be an internal fear. If our doorbell rings and he's standing at the door, I have to think about whether I want him to come in this house.
That's true.
Um, and I only say that because the way he left, actually he when I said he left, we hugged and everything. That was one thing, but what precipitated that, and just
Right.
the way things have just been cut out, there's an unknown part of this, an
Yeah.
unknown quality to this, that we don't know who is coming back to talk to us. We don't know. Anyway, it's a concern.
Well, I would think that if he either calls, writes, texts, or shows up, then he's probably a little bit different than at when he left. So
Mhm.
it probably not quite the same person.
Right.
So that would be one thing, I think. If he's initiating it, I would think that would be not the same as when he left.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think from what you were saying and how he was acting, and being a trained, being in law enforcement, to look for things. I'm pretty sure you'd know pretty quickly if he was unstable when he came in, you know.
Well, yeah, and I guess my or our lack of understanding, or lack of knowledge of the mental
Yeah,
health part of this that's been suggested, and it's only been suggested at this point.
yeah,
Um, you know, anyway, that's a concern that I have, and I
sure.
don't think I've even shared that with my wife. But when she sees this, she'll hear me say this. Um, it's awkward. You know,
It will be, yeah,
it's the whole episode and situation. Um, now, I think I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I think the question came up is, when did you first notice, or when can you pinpoint when an
yeah,
estrangement was happening? Something like that. I
right.
recall hearing,
I've asked that a few
and
times.
yeah, and I heard that, and I started thinking, and I probably sensed it a while back. But he went to college. He went to a music school, um, uh, after high school, and he there was something different. I mean, and I think I even shared with you that even down to the simplicity of ordering a pizza for the family and then knocking on his door to ask him if he wants to have a slice of pizza with us, and
Right.
feeling the unknown of what is going to come back for the response,
Yeah.
and how uneasy we felt, or I'll speak for myself, how I felt in my own house, with my son there, my youngest son, who, and I'll share this with you. This is when he was born cesarean
Yeah.
in a foreign country, and the doctor allowed me to place my hand under him and lift him out from my wife's
Oh,
abdomen.
wow. That's
and
cool.
and I cut his umbilical cord and cleaned him off, and so that's a special moment that I'll forever cherish, and so I look at who he has been to me, from that very first moment, of his life,
Right.
to see where we're at now, where it's mind-boggling, that things have transpired the way they have.
Well, and back to what you were asking before about if he shows up or if this happens, it will be awkward. I mean,
Mhm.
it was very awkward for us in the very beginning.
No, no, I asked the question of what does reconciliation mean? Even
Yeah.
with my father, who I told you I was or estranged from for good 40 years or so. um, I know he's in his later years in life. He's trying to reconnect,
Yeah.
and I struggle with whatever that may mean, thinking he doesn't know me, hasn't known me since I was 10 years old. So I'm now 66.
Yeah.
And, uh, and, and anyway, it's a very abstract feeling of what is supposed to happen. Am I supposed to all of a sudden say, "Dad, I love you," it's for me, it's a struggle to kind of get to that
Yeah.
point of understanding. Have I reconciled with my father? I can tell you, probably about 20 years ago, I basically reached a point of I don't even acknowledging whatever happened in the past. Let's move forward. He was 21 years old when he got married and had a child. And, I was his first, and then my sister rather, and his daughter. And I'm thinking of myself, what was I like at 21, 22 years old? And
Right.
um, I could not have really even conceptualized starting a family and all that at that age. So he made some, bad choices, and did some things, whatever. And his life went in his direction. And, as I got older, my life went in my own direction. And the good news is I survived. He's still
Right.
alive. I hope I can live as long as he does, that type of thing.
Right.
But if you were to ask me, have we reconciled? I don't know what that means. I mean, we
You
talk on the
know,
phone every
mm,
couple of weeks,
yeah,
maybe not really any in-depth discussion. I mean, there are other personality attributes to how he is and how we've related that, you know, is another program, you know,
right.
but
I hear you.
but so anyway, in relation to now with our son who left us, that what does a reconciliation mean? I'm thinking of him coming back, or I mean, I've even struggled initially when this first hit us, and I had to ask the therapist, what do I do? I'm a father and I feel I should be responsible as a father. Do I get on a plane and head out to California and try to find him and try to see if he's okay? And that, and everyone said, no, no, no,
Yeah,
if that's what you do, that's what you do. But think about it, because I'm sure that's not what
because
he wants you to do.
it won't end up like fathers knows best, and
Right.
then you know more than like, I mean, not that it couldn't, but more than likely any story I've ever heard about someone doing that, it's not turned out well.
Well, it hits at, and this is where my wife and I have asked many times and talked it through, and that's a good thing. We do talk often,
That's
or as
good.
much as we can deal with this. And um, what should we be doing as parents? Um, and I don't, we haven't figured out what the answer to that is.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing about, on a humorous side, the shows that we talked about, in our childhood,
Hmm.
they never had these issues.
No.
They weren't dealing with an estranged child, or if they did, they found a very within the walls of their home way of dealing with it and talking it
Right.
through. Um, so
Well, I was just watching a video the other day. It's a little different, but it's about parental alienation, which I'm sure you've run across that
mhm,
doing your research. And that's usually where the parents are separated and one is turn the kid against the other one, kind of thing.
right.
But in watching that, one of the young lady that hosts the YouTube channel um, did a video about she was estranged or alienated from her dad for 20 years,
Mhm,
and she sees the truth now, and she's had a relationship with him for the past however long it's been. And so she's going through these things that what can what I don't remember how she put it, but a list of what the parents could be doing or have done that helped or whatever. And it's things like assuming the kids haven't said, "I don't want you to contact me," because then that creates a whole, as I'm sure you are very well aware, a legal thing that they could,
mhm,
you
mhm,
know, have you trouble. But assuming that's not the case, sending letters, sending uh, texts or emails or touching base once in a while, as long as they haven't said they don't want you to do that, I don't see an issue with that. That you could do, assuming you and your therapist talk about it. But um, that's worked for some people, and some people need to do that, even if they don't respond. Which, if you decide to go down like a road like that, I would certainly expect no response.
Yeah,
Same thing.
and what is really the most concerning at present is my wife. You know, like I said, she's dealing with it, and as of today, we're doing okay. We're getting through this,
Yeah.
but I know it weighs on her of the why. Why her? Why her? I
Right.
mean, the issues. If there's anyone that's willing to or can take the blame, if that's the right term,
Right.
I instigated kind of like the actual physical movement. Relocate. You gotta leave the house.
Right.
Um, and but he's I almost feel like it's unfair to her of what he's doing to her, because she's been the. I mean, she looks at her youngest son in particular as her little boy, and has
Right.
treated him as such, so I know it bothers her, and because it bothers her, it bothers me. I
Of
guess.
course.
Right, right. I'm not sure if I emphasized this when I was talking about what were the indicators to kind of think
Yeah.
that this could happen. Um, so I guess as we speak now, I'm not surprised that it kind of played out this way or has happened,
Yeah.
um, because the relationship and the way we related to each other while he was here in particular, it was tense, and
Yeah.
very difficult, almost to the point of being unbearable emotionally. And my wife and I said, "Who is this guy that's in our house here? I mean, is this our son?" Yeah,
Right.
and it wasn't. We couldn't identify. We couldn't, we didn't understand really what was going on in his life for him to be acting out the things that he was doing, and
Right.
particularly on the religious side. I mean, that part of it really took on a life of its own, and um,
As
I
that
don't know.
tends to. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But the good news is, like I said, we're getting through this. It's a day by day process.
Yeah.
You know, uh, we feel we have, or I'll again speak for myself. I feel I have a good support system. Mainly starting with my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
The two that, I mean, they're not as open of talking about it. They're more angry than I am.
Yeah.
Uh,
Our
and
both of our girls were too. They were very mad.
really,
Yeah.
yeah, and they've almost kind of like, as you talk to them about what they feel like expressing, they almost want to just write them off, and you know he's out
Yep.
there, and just forget about him. Well, mother and father can't just forget about
No, much as we might want to sometimes.
him. But
Uh,
but yeah, so I don't know if I captured the full gist of our journey here, but it's been just that,
yeah.
familiar to me from my own past experience, not familiar to my wife. She came from a very close, five siblings, all get
Right.
along, and all went through the passing of
My
their
3
parents,
sons.
and yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
um and here I am, with kind of like the alter universe type of lifestyle, but like I said, we're getting through it, and with the strength of my wife and us willing to talk about it. We don't
Yeah.
always agree, but we are there for each other to talk us through when needed, and so
If your son were to ever run across this and listen to what you had to say, assuming you made it all the way to the end, because a lot of them don't. Um, one, do you think he would be upset like some of your other kids don't wanna share necessarily? Do you think he'd be
Great
upset with it?
question. I was just talking to my wife and I were just talking to our daughter, who lives overseas with her husband and our granddaughter. Um, she basically asked the same question,
Yeah,
and she kind of commented that she felt that he might have an adverse kind of reaction to
yeah,
hearing me talk about it, and I had to think about that, but then it's that tug of war of
right,
do I say what I need to say, or not, and do I take into consideration what others might kind of get from what I'm saying, or so I don't know. I'm hoping if he does, I mean, I doubt he'll
right.
he'll listen to this or find this anywhere. I'd be surprised if he ever did. But but if he did, I I think he might understand that he's got two concerned parents who love him very much. That
Yeah.
um, we're hoping he figures things out. And as in a father, this is getting back to the father part of this. Um, I'm optimistic that my son will figure this out and get himself whatever. I don't want to
Right.
say, if I say get himself whole, it implies that he's not there. I don't know
Right.
where he is, other than he's not with us,
Right.
uh, so whatever he needs, whatever he thinks he needs to do to better his life, to better himself, to get himself grounded. If he needs professional help, I
Right.
hope he finds an avenue to get that support. If the religious component is what it should be able to guide him towards
Right.
the same type of principles, I would think. Um, at least I would hope. And So, again, I'm optimistic that at some point we'll get through
Good.
this. I just don't know what that word reconcile really means once we get to that point of even trying to call it that.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
So, is there any advice from a father, from another parent's perspective? Is there any advice that you would give?
Um, it's not so much. Well, I don't know if this is advice or not, but parenting is tough. It's
Yeah.
as we said, I didn't read a book on how to be a parent or how to be a father, but I would say that there is a value to being a parent, and um, and us parents don't talk about it in that way. I mean,
Right.
what we do for our children, for ourselves, to allow our children to have the best type of life that you try to give them, has a value to it. Now,
Right.
not everyone understands that or might be able to, put it in that context, but um, I feel that what my wife and I have provided for our children means something rather than nothing. And so in that, as we bring it down to our son who left us, I'm hoping he can reflect on some of that as we reflect on who he is to us, and what we have been and what we have done and said and shared. And I mean, we look at, in retrospect, we've kind of had an ideal life, lives or livelihoods together as a family, um, which not all families can say. I mean, I realize that.
Right.
I couldn't say that from my own childhood experience, but um, we've been proud of what our kids have accomplished, including our son, and something went wrong somewhere. So I don't have the answers to how you prevent happening what happened to us, uh, because we just don't know what it is we did or what it is going on in his life for him to
Right.
take the actions that he took. Um, but so I guess if I were to offer any advice, it would be, be aware of who you are to your kids, um, and hopefully you have an opening to be aware of how they see you, and
Right.
uh, that was something that I never really thought about until he started telling me how he saw me. He
Right.
saw me as controlling, and now some of that might have been anger fueled. I don't know, but it's coming from a place of his reality of how
Right.
he looked at me. So um, that would be worth talking to him at some point, as we get through this down the road.
Yeah. I know everybody, has a different perception, and sometimes it might be completely in reality, and sometimes it might be pieces of, reality. So,
Hmm.
but it is what they perceive. So you can't. necessarily negate that. So,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's easy. It's easy as I'm like trying to think of all the things that we've addressed tonight, and um, and then compare that to the real world of how life has been with raising a son, raising three kids. Um, it's easy to kind of lose context of what all that means, I guess, and
sure.
um, uh, but we're at a point now where it's also worth trying to ask the questions, trying to do the self-reflection, whatever that means and whatever that
Right.
does for you, and learn. um you know um we've done our best as best we could, and something went wrong. We're trying to figure out what that something is.
And at least you're trying to figure it out because some people aren't, they're just
Hmm.
not there yet.
Right, right,
Well,
right.
I really appreciate Terry you coming on today. I think we have one. We talked about it before. We have quite a bit in common, even though our ages are a little bit far apart. I'm 55,
Hmm.
but we have a bit in common, and our situations are kind of similar in some ways. So it was really nice and refreshing to talk to another dad. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was important for me, to share what I shared, and to
cool.
share it in the context as a father. I'm
Yeah,
hoping other fathers or more fathers will come forward and share their feelings and stories, or whatever. But
me too.
it, it's something that for me right now, and for my wife and I, is important to kind of really focus on, and realize, there's a lot to this parenting thing that
Yeah,
we didn't know about, and we're learning.
right. Right, for sure. Okay, cool. Well, again, thank you. I appreciate it. And